Both the 14th and 15th Amendment were thus made innocuous, so far as black people was concerned. And the 14th Amendment in particular became the chief refuge and bulwark of the corporations. Yeah. It was thus that finance and the power of wealth accomplished through the Supreme Court what had not been able to do successfully through Congress. In 1876 came the bargain between big business and the South. At first, there was an attempt at direct bribery in Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina. In one case, in one state, a majority of the board was said to have been secured if Tilden would pay $80,000. But this was rather too crude and direct. The work of Mr. Charles Foster's representative from the district of Rutherford Hayes in Ohio was much more subtle and certain. For Charles Foster's representatives from Hayes, one district stated in a speech in the Louisiana debate that it would be the policy of Mr. Hayes's, if inaugurated, to wipe out, quote, sectional lines, that under him the flag would wave other states, not providence, over freemen, not subjects. Negotiations were entered into the conference held. On the 26th of February, 1876, there were 3 conferences. The outcome was an agreement. The Republicans guaranteed that Mr. Hayes, then when he become president, would by no interference and the withdrawal of troops allow the planter capitalists under the name of Democrats to control South Carolina and Louisiana. Hold on a second. Nope. They also agreed to induce President Grant to adopt the same policy before the end of his term. This meant that Southern landholders and capitalists would be put in complete control of disenfranchised black labor. The Democrats promised to, quote, guarantee peace, good order, protection of the law to whites and black people. Or, in other words, exploitation should be so quiet, orderly, and legal as to assure a regular profit to Southern owners and Northern investors. This bargain was so raw and obvious that it must not yet be submitted to public opinion. In order, therefore, to avoid bringing up the issue in the United States Senate before the cabinet was confirmed, and perhaps preventing the confirmation of persons favorable to this Southern policy, the Democrats agreed not to elect the long-term Louisiana senator until March 10th. Other details were arranged the next day. The Democrats' assurances were ratified by Governor Nichols of Louisiana, and a copy was sent north. Louisiana was told that Grant had promised that as soon as the count should be completed, to rescind or modify all orders to reinforce the laws in the South. Foster sent an unsigned draft of the letter to Brown and to Senator Gordon. Quote, the Democrats thought the letter might be, quote, fuller and stronger, end quote, but agreed to it. An hour later, the same letter signed was received from Foster. The Democratic legislators, protected by armed members of the White League, declared Nichols governor. He was eventually recognized by the president, and Louisiana became Democratic. Federal troops were withdrawn from under Hayes, and force behind the dictatorship of labor in the South disappeared. At last, the last act was to appoint a Kentuckian and a Georgian to the Supreme Court, and indeed, the deed was done. Black people did not surrender the ballot easily or immediately. They continued to hold remnants of political power in South Carolina, in Florida, Louisiana, and parts of North Carolina, in Texas, Tennessee, and Virginia. Black congressmen came out of the South until 1895, and black legislators served as late as 1896. But it was a losing battle, with public opinion, industry, wealth, and religion against them. Their own leaders decreed politics, quote unquote, and preached submission. All their efforts towards manly self-assertion were distracted by defeatism and counseled to despair, backed by the powerful propaganda of religion, which taught meekness, sacrifice, and humility. But the decisive influence was the systematic and overwhelming economic pressure. Black people who wanted work must not dabble in politics. Black people who wanted to increase their income must not agitate the black problem. Positions of influence were only open to those black people who were certified as being, quote, safe and sane, end quote. And their careers were closely scrutinized and passed upon. From 1880 onward, in order to earn a living, the American black person was compelled to give up his political power. There was an old remedy known since the 18th century, the colonization movement, which had resulted in Liberia, and the first black convention held in Philadelphia in 1833. Migration to Canada was discussed and recommended. A large number went there. In 1853, a convention at Rochester opposed immigration, but seceders called another convention, and this convention sent emissaries to Haiti, Africa, South America, Central America. As a result, some 2,000 black people went to Haiti. The war stopped thoughts of immigration, except as Lincoln proposed it. In 1876, movements arose simultaneously in several states. The first conspicuous leader was Benjamin Singleton, a black undertaker in Tennessee, who took two colonies of 7,432 black people to Kansas. Henry Adams started an even greater movement in Louisiana, sending organizers into each state in the South. It claimed by 1879 92,800 members in Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Alabama. Altogether, about 60,000 black people went to Kansas, 2/3 of whom were destitute when they arrived. Slow individual movements of black people from the south to the north kept up, but there were no further mass movements until the World War. Indeed, the whole matter of immigration to escape the new regime in the South was complicated by the attitude of the North. Few northern communities wanted black immigrants, and labor organizations opposed them, so that it was difficult to get work. Outside of the United States, growing imperialism and the treatment of Liberia, Haiti, and other small countries of color made immigration less attractive, and the United States government, by permitting the spreading of unfavorable reports and putting difficulties in the way of black travelers, had made immigration of color to the West, to the Caribbeans and South America, difficult even to this day. The situation settled down to a new system and a new outlook in the South. The whole history of this post-construction development is yet to be written, but a few words concerning it may close this chapter. First, there is systematic disenfranchisement of black people. He was kept from voting by force, by economic intimidation, by propaganda designed to lead him to believe that there was no salvation for him in political lines, but that he must depend entirely upon thrift and the goodwill of his white employers. Then came the series of disenfranchisements, law discriminating against poverty and ignorance, and aimed at the situation of the people of color and labor, while the white laborer escaped from deliberate convening and through the understanding and grandfather clause. To make assurances doubly sure, the white primary system was built on top of this, by which the Democratic Party confined its membership to white voters of all parties. The, quote, white primary was made by law and public pressures, the real voting arena in particularly all southern states. This brings us to the situation when Booker T. Washington became the leader of the black race and advised them to depend upon industrial education and work rather than politics. The better class of Southern black people stopped voting for a generation. Then, with the shift of population towards the North, there comes a present situation when out of 12 million black people, 3 million are in the North and 9 million in the South. Those in the North and in the bordering states vote. Those in the South are seriously restricted in their voting. And this restriction means that their political power is exercised by the white South, which gave the white South an extraordinary political influence as compared with the voters of the North and East. The disenfranchisement of black people in the South became nearly complete. In no other civilized or modern land has a group of people, most of whom were able to read and write, been allowed so small a voice in their own government. Every promise of eventual recognition of the intelligent black voter has been broken, and the former slave states of Virginia to Texas accepting Missouri. There are no black states officials, no black members of legislators, no judges, no judges on the bench. There we go. And usually no jurors. There are no county official people of color of any sort. In the towns and cities, there is no administrative officers of color, no members of the city council, no magistrates, no constables, and very seldom even a policeman. In this way, at least 8 million black people were left without effective voice in government, naked to the worst elements of the community. Beyond this, caste has been revived in a modern civilized land. It was supposed to be a relic of barbarism and extent only in Asia, but it has grown up and has been carefully nurtured and put on a legal basis with religious and moral sanctions in the South. First, it was presented and defended as race separation, but it was never mere race separation. It was always domination of black people by white officials, white police, and laws and ordinances made by white men. Schools were separated by schools of color, was controlled by white officials who decided how much, or rather, how little should be spent upon them, who decided what could be taught and what textbooks used in the sort of subservient teachers was wanted. In travel, separation compelled passengers, people of color passengers, to pay first-class fares for second or third-class combinations, and to endure on the streetcars and trains discrimination of all sorts. They say ghettos, but I call them underdeveloped areas, were built up in nearly all southern cities, not always sharply defined but pretty definite. And in these, black people must live, and in them white vice and crime might find shelter, and black delinquency could go unpoliced. Little attention was paid to lightening sewerage and paving in these quarters. Besides this, the determined psychology of caste was built up. In every possible way, it was impressed and it advertised that the white was superior and that black people are an inferior race. This inferiority must be publicly acknowledged and submitted to. Titles of courtesy were denied black men of color and women. Certain signs of civility and usages amounted to public and personal results were insisted upon. The most educated and deserving black men was compelled to, in many public places, to occupy a place beneath the lowest and least deserving of the whites. Public institutions like parks and libraries either denied all accommodation to black people or gave them inferior facilities. This distinguished white Southerner said in 1885, "Is the free man a free man? No. We have considered his position in the land whence nothing can, and no man has a shadow of a right to drive him, and where he is being multiplied as only oppression can multiply the people. We have carefully analyzed his relations to the finer and prouder race, with which he shares the ownership and citizenship of a region large enough for 10 times the number of people, without accepting one word of his testimony. We have shown that the laws made for his protection against the habits of suspicion and oppression in his late master are being constantly set aside, not for their defects, but for such merit as they possess. We have shown that the very natural source of these oppressions is the surviving sediments of an extinct and now universally excreted institutions. Sediments which no intelligent or moral people should harbor a moment after the admission that slavery was a moral mistake. We have shown the outrageousness of these tyrannies in some of their workings, and how distinctly they antagonize every state and national interests involving in the elevation of people of color race. It is not well to have done so. It is not well to have done so. For I say again, the question has reached a moment of special importance. The South stands on her honor before the clean equalities of the issue. It is no longer rather constitutional amendments, but rather the internal principles of justice are violated. Thank you for being in my... Oh my gosh. It's taking forever for people to... Hello, it's taking forever for people to come in. Am I okay? Am I coming in clear? Am I coming in clear? Yep, loading fine. Okay, they have to come back up. With this went widespread and determined exploitation of black labor. And of course, above all, taxation without representation. Taxation fell crushingly upon the poor, so that the proportions of taxes which the black laboring paid, according to income, was much larger than that borne by the rich whites and even the laboring whites. Black people had no voice concerning this taxation, rather in the state, county, city, or town or district administration. He had little redress in the courts. The judges of the upper courts were usually selected from the better class of men, whose fairness could be depended on so far as public opinion and their own sympathy with white exploiters would admit. But the police courts and magistrates courts were in the hands of the wretched set of white, black-hating politicians, and 9/10 of the black court cases ended here and filled the chain gangs with black people. Try this again. Connection failed. Am I coming in clear? Anybody? Am I coming in clear? Hello? Yep, okay, good. It was the policy of the state to keep black labor poor, to confine him as far as possible, and menial occupation to make him a surplus labor reservoir, and to force him into peonage and unpaid toil. In a report by the Hon. Charles W. Russell, Assistant Attorney General to Attorney General in 1908, appears this language. I have no doubt From my investigation, the experience is that the chief support of peonage is the particular system of state laws prevailing in the South, intended evidently to compel services on the part of the working man. From the usual condition of the great mass of laboring men, where these laws are enforced to peonage, it is but a step at most. In fact, it is difficult to draw a distinction between the conditions of a man who remains in service against his will, because the state has passed a certain law under which he can be arrested and returned to work, and the condition of a man on a nearby farm who is actually made to stay at work by arrest and actual threat of force under the same law. Let's see if Fatima comes up. I swear to God, it's not letting me come up. It's not letting people come up. Oh, there's Fatima. The editor of the Macon, Georgia Telegraph said recently, since at least 1865, we have been holding back the black people to keep him from getting beyond the white man. Our idea has been that black people should be kept poor, but by keeping him poor, we have thrown him into competition with ourselves and have kept ourselves poor. Of course, Governor Talmadge was the popular attitude. It is to hold black people down in order to make him work, to keep him poor. The Southerners are willing to keep themselves and their kind and sections down and poor in order to keep black people that way. To make this policy effective, it was necessary to keep black people ignorant and disorganized. Here, however, there were some difficulties. Black people had higher schools, supported largely by Northern philanthropy. They were turning out small but increasing numbers of educated men. There were, therefore, large numbers of trained teachers available for the public schools. The North was not disposed at this time to defend universal suffrage or even democracy, but it did still believe in intelligence, so that black public schools had to be kept open, and at the same time the private schools, which were furnishing teachers and leaders, are depending not on state aid, but on Northern philanthropy. This meant that a large and influential sections of the North had direct contact and knowledge of educated black people. For a long time, they defended black colleges, the normal school, from all assaults. Indeed, it was not until the 1890s, that organized property in the North, uniting with Southern propaganda for black industrial education, made an assault upon black colleges that almost overthrew it. But that is another story. There were, nevertheless, numberless ways in which black schools could be and were decreased in efficiency. In the first place, the public school funds were distributed with open and unshamed discrimination. Anywhere from twice or 10 times as much was spent on white children as on black children, and even then the poor white child did not receive an adequate education. In the Black Belt, particularly, large amount of funds were drawn by the county officers because of black population and distributed among the whites to the extent of sending some to college. Black schools were given few buildings and little equipment. No effort was made to compel black children to go to school. On the contrary, in the country, they were deliberately kept out of school by the requirements of contract labor, which embraced the labor of wife and children, as well as of the labor himself. So basically, they want, we know what that means. The course of study was limited. the school terms was made and kept short, and in many cases, there was a deliberate effort, as expressed by one leading Southerner, Hoke Smith, when two black teachers applied for a school to, quote, take the less competent, to take the less competent. Yeah. The supervising officers paid little or no attention to black schools and the education of black people. For many years, after the overthrow of Reconstruction proceeded in spite of their school system, not because of it. An attempt was made through advocacy of so-called industrial education to divert black schools from training in knowledge to training in crafts and industry. But here, the white laborers, South, North, and South, objected, and particularly no effective industrial training was ever given in the Southern public schools, except training for cooking and menial service. Sickness, disease, and death have been a widespread physical result of caste. The sick have had wretched care. Public hospitals supported by public funds turn black people away or segregate and neglect them in cellars and annexes. White physicians often despise their black clientele, and physicians of color crowd into a larger town and city to escape the insults and insecurity to which professional people of color is exposed to the country and smaller towns. Above all, crime was used in the South as a source of income for the state. An English traveler wrote in 1871, here he go. I confess I am more and more suspicious about the criminal justice of these southern states. In Georgia, there is no regular penitentiary at all, but an organized system of letting out the prisoners for profit. Some people here have got up a company for the purpose of hiring convicts. They pay $25,000 a year, besides all expenses in food and kept, so that their money is clear profit to the state. The lessees work of prisoners, both on estates and in mines, and apparently maintain severe discipline in their own way, and make a good thing of it. Colonel P, who was not very mainly mouthed, admits that he kept the concern because he could not stand the inhumanity of it. Another partner in the concern, talking with great glee of the money he had made out of the convicts. This does seem simply a return to another form of slavery. In no part of the modern world has there been so open and conscious a traffic in crime for deliberate social degradation and private profit as in the South since slavery. Black people is not antisocial. He is not natural criminal. Crime of the vicious type outside endeavor to achieve freedom or in revenge for cruelty as was rare in the slave South. Since 1876, black people have been arrested on the slightest provocation and given long sentences or fines, which they were compelled to work out. The resulting peonage of criminals extended into every southern state and led to the most revolting situations and southern white women rights. In some states, their convict labor is sold to the highest bidder, and cruel treatment of the helpless human chattel in the hands of guards such as no tongue can tell nor pen picture. Prison inspectors with convicts herding together, irrespective of age, confined at night in shackles, housed sometimes as has been found in old box cars, packed almost as closely as sardines in a box. During the day, all are worked under armed guard, who stand ready to shoot down any who may attempt to escape from this hell upon earth. the modern American Bastille. Should one escape, the bloodhounds trained for the purpose are put upon his track, and the chances are that he will be brought back, severely flogged and put on double shackles or worse. Of all the degrading positions to our mind, what that of the whipping boss in Georgia penitentiary system is the worst. He stands over his pinioned victims and applies the lash of the naked quivering flesh of a fellowman, piles it hard enough to lacerate the flesh and send the blood coursing down and bruised back and sides from the gaping and whipcord cuts. And just think of the mercilessness, the inhumanity, the bestiality of the sediment that can drive the leash deeper and deeper through the cuts and gash on the body of the human being, white or black, just as a cool calculating business for a very inwardly stipend. Hundreds of Southern fortunes have been amassed by the enslavement of criminals. George W. Cable protests in 1883 and wrote, excuse me, if anything may be inferred from the mortal results of the lease system in other states, the year's death rate of the convict camps of Louisiana must exceed that of any pestilence that ever fell upon Europe in the Middle Ages. And as far as popular rumor goes, it confirms as this assumption on every hand. Every mention of these camps is followed by an excretion of the scandalized community, whose ears is very now and then shocked afresh with some new whispers of their frightful barbarities. It is not for the present writer to assert that every other community there, where the leasing of convicts prevail, is moved to indignation by the same sense of outrage and disgrace. Yet it certainly would be but a charitable assumption to believe that the day is not remote when in every such region the sediment of the people will write over the gates of the convicts' stockades and over the doors of the lessees some sumptuous homes, one word, Alabama, and field of blood. The normal amount of crime which the arrogant working population would have involved has been tremendously increased. Young criminals and vagrants are deliberately multiplied, and this is in turn made an excuse for mob law and lynching. Women of color were looked upon as a legitimate prey for white men. The protection from them, even against men of color, was seldom furnished. While all instruments of group-controlled police, courts, government, appropriation, and the like were in the hands of whites, no power was left in black hands. If a white man was assaulted by a white man or a black person, the police are at hand. If a black person is assaulted by a white man, the police are more apt to arrest the victim than the transgressor. Let me reread that again. While the instruments of group-controlled police, courts, governments, appropriation, and the like were in the hands of whites, no power was left for black hands. If a white man is assaulted by a white man or a black person, the police are at hand. If a black person is assaulted by a white man, the police are more apt to arrest the victim than the aggressor. If he is assaulted by a black person, he is in most cases without redress or protection, and the group will of the man of color has no power to express itself. Interracial sex jealousy and accompanying sadism has been made the wide foundation of mobs and lynching. With thousands of white fathers of children of color, there are scarcely a case on record where such a father has been held legally responsible. Such evils led to widespread violence in the South to murder the mobs. Probably in no country in a civilized world did human life become so cheap. This condition prevailed among both whites and black people and characterized the South even to our day. A spirit of lawlessness became widespread. White people paid no attention to their own laws. White men became a law unto themselves, and black men, so far as their aggression were confined to their own people, need no fear intervention of white police. Practically all men went armed, and the South reached the extraordinary distinction of being the most modern civilized country where human beings were publicly burned alive. Is it uncivilized? Yeah. Southern papers specialized on black crime with ridicule and coarse caricature. The police court, where hearts bled, was the matter of hilarious newspaper laughter, while a note of decency and success among black people was burned on the back page or ignored entirely. The political success of the doctrine of radical separation, which overthrew Reconstruction by uniting the planters and the poor whites, was far exceeded by its astonishing economic results. The theory of laboring class unity rests upon the assumption that labor, despite internal jealousies, will unite because of their opposition to exploitation by the capitalists. According to this, even after a part of the poor white laboring class became identified with the planters and eventually displaced them, their interests would be diametrically opposed to those of the mass of white labor, and of course, to those of the black laborers. This would throw white and black labor into one class and participate in united fight for higher wage and better working condition. Most persons do not realize how far this failed to work in the South, and it failed to work because the theory of race was supplemented by a carefully planned and slowly evolved method, which drove such a wedge between white and black workers. And there probably are not today in the world two groups of workers with particularly identical interests who hate and fear each other so deeply and persistently, and who are kept so far apart that neither sees anything in common interests. It must be remembered that the white group of laborers, while they received a low wage, were compensated in part by the sort of public and psychological wage. They were given public differences and titles of courtesy because they were white. They were admitted freely with all classes of white people to public functions, public parks, and the best schools. The police were drawn from the ranks of the courts and the courts independent upon those votes. Treat them with such lunacy as to encourage lawlessness. Their vote selected public officials, and while this had small effect upon the economic situation, it had a great effect upon their personal treatment and the defense shown them. White schoolhouses were the best in the community and conspicuously placed, and they cost anywhere from twice to 10 times as much per capita as the schools of color. The newspapers specialized on news that flattered the poor whites and almost utterly ignored black concept in crime and ridicule. On the other hand, in the same way, black people was subject to public insults, was afraid of mobs, was liable for the jibes of children and the unreasoning fear of white women, and was compelled almost continuously to submit to various badges. The result was that the wages of both classes could be kept low, the whites fearing to be supplanted by black labor, and black people always being threatened by the substitution of white labor. Mob violence and lynching were the inevitable results of the attitude of these two classes, and for a time were a sort of permissible Roman holidays, for the entertainment of vicious whites. One can see, for these reasons, why labor organizers and labor agitators made such small headway in the South. They were, for the most part, appealing to laborers who would rather have low wages upon which they can eke out the existence than, quote, see labor of color with a decent wage. White labor saw every advance of black people as threat to their radical prerogatives. Yeah. Let's make sure. I think it's prerogatives. Make sure. I'm going to say it out loud. Prerogative. Yay! Yep, prerogatives. Sweet. So that in many districts, black people were afraid, thank you, to build decent homes, or dress well, or own carriages, bicycles, or automobiles because of possible retaliation on the part of the whites. Thus, every problem of labor advance in the South was skillfully turned by demagogues into a matter of interracial jealousy. Perhaps the most conspicuous proof of this was the Atlanta riot in 1906, which followed Hoke Smith's vicious attempt to become United States Senator on a platform which first attacked corporations and then was suddenly twisted into scandalous traducing of the black race. To this day, no casual or an unsophisticated reader of the white Southern press could possibly gather that that American black masses were anything but degraded, ignorant, insufficient examples of the incurable inferior race. Disgusting. The result of all this had to be unfortunate for black people. He has a caged human being. He was a caged human being, driven into a curious mental, oh my gosh, don't know this word, provincialism. I think that's it. Let me go make sure. Provincialism. Yep. An attitude and mindset characterized by a narrow, limited, or unsophisticated worldview. An inferiority complex dominated him. He did not believe himself a man like other men. He could not teach his children self-respect. Black people as a group gradually lost his manners, his courtesy, his light-hearted kindness. Large numbers sank into apathy and fatalism. There was no chance for the black man. There was no use to strive. In striving, ambition was not for black people. The effect of caste on the moral integrity of the black race in America has thus been widely disastrous. Servility and fawning, gross flattery of white folk and lying to appease the cudgel them. Failure to achieve dignity and self-respect and moral self-assertion, personal cowardice, and submission to insult and aggression, exaggerated and despicable humility, lack of faith of black people in themselves and in other black people and in all folks of color, inordinate admiration for the stigmata of success among white folk, wealth and ignorance, cunning dishonesty, and assumptions of superiority, the exaltation of laziness and indifferences, is just as successful as the industry and striving which invites taxation and oppression, dull apathy and cynicism, faith in no future and in the habit of moving and wandering in the search of justice, a religion of prayer and submission to replace determination and effort. These are not universal results, or else the or else black people long since would have dwindled and died in crime and disease. But they are so widespread as to bringing inner conflict as baffling as the problems of interracial relationships. And they hold back the moral grit and organized effort, which are the only hope of survival. On this, in spite of this comes the extraordinary record of accomplishment, a record so contradictory of what one might easily expect, that many people and even black people themselves are deceived by it. The real question is not so much that black people has done in spite of caste, as what he might have accomplished with reasonable encouragement. He was cut down his illiteracy more than 2/3 in 50 years. But with decent schools, it ought to have been cut down by 99%. He has accumulated land and property, but has not been able to hold 1/10 of that which he has rightly earned. He has achieved success in many lines as an inventor, scientist, scholar, and writer, but most of his abilities have been choked in chain gangs and by open, deliberate discrimination and conspiracies of silence. Damn, this system is just like it's arising these characteristics and aspects of black people because of the discrimination, racism, and degradation of their existence, trying to prove to them in their psychologically and conditionally that they're inferior to white people. So yeah, he was made a place for himself in literature and art, but the great deeps of his artistic gifts had never yet been plumbed. And yet, for all that, he has accomplished, not only the nation, but the South itself claimed credit and actually points to it as proof of the wisdom, or at least the uninnocuousness of organized suppression. It is but human experience to find that the complete suppression of a race is possible, despite inner encouragement and submission to the oppression of others. There persisted the mighty spirit and emotional rebound that kept the vast number struggling for its rights, for self-expression, and for social uplift. Such men, in many cases, became targets of the right race. They are denounced as troublemakers. They are denied opportunity. They are driven from their homes, and they were lynched. It is doubtful if there is another group of 12 million people in the midst of the modern cultured land, who are so widely inhabited and mentally confined as the American black person within the race of people of color. The philosophy of salvation has by the pressure of caste been curiously twisted and distorted. Shall they use the torch and dynamite? Shall they go north or fight it out in the south? Shall they segregate themselves even more than they are now in states, towns, cities, or sections? Shall they leave the country? Yeah. Are they Americans or foreigners? Shall they stand and sing "My Country 'Tis of Thee"? Shall they marry and rear children and save and buy homes, or deliberately commit race suicide? Ordinarily, such questions within a group settle themselves by laboratory experiment. It is shown that violence does not pay, that quite persistent efforts wins. Bitterness and pessimism prove in handicap. And yet, in the case of black people, it is almost impossible to obtain such definite laboratory results. Failure cannot be attributed to individual neglect, and success does not necessarily follow individual efforts. It is impossible for disentangle the results of caste and the results of work and striving. Ordinarily, a group experiments tries now that measures results, eliminates bad advice and unwise action by achieving success. But here, success is so curtailed and frustrated that guiding wisdom fails. Why should we save? What good does it do to be upstanding with self-respect? Who gains by thrift and raises by education? Such mental frustrations cannot indefinitely continue. Someday it may burst in fire and blood. Who will be to blame? And where the greater cost? Black folk, after all, have little to lose, but civilization has all. Black men that are Americans, I don't know how to say that, knows his fight here is to fight to the finish. Either he dies or wins. If he wins, it will be by no subterfuge or invasion of amalgamation. He will enter modern civilization here in America as a black man, on terms of perfect and unlimited equality with any white man, or he will enter not at all. Either experimentation, root and branch, or absolute equality. There can be no compromise. This is the last great battle of the West. Evil results of the revolution of 1876 have not been confined to black people. The reaction of the whites was just as significant. The white people of the South were essentially a fine, kindly breed, and the same sort of human beings that one finds in the world over. Perhaps their early and fatal mistake was when they refused, long before the Civil War, to allow in the South differences of opinion. They would not let honest white Southerners continue to talk against slavery. They drove out the nonconformists. They would not listen to the radicals. The result was that there has been built up in the South an intolerance fatal to human culture. Men act as they do in the South. They murder, they lynch, they insult, because they listen to but one side of the question. They seldom know by real human contract. Black people who are men, they read books that laud the South and the, quote, lost cause, but they are childish and furious when criticized and interpret all criticism as personal attacks. The result is that the South in the main is ranged against liberalism. No liberal movement in the United States or in the world has been able to make advance among Southerners. Even they are militaristic and will have nothing to do with a peace movement. Young Southerners eagerly crowd West Point and Annapolis. The South is not interested in the freedom of, they use the word dark, and they're using the word India. It was no sympathy with the oppressed of Africa or of Asia. It is for the most part against unions and labor movements, because there can be no real labor movement in the South. Their laboring class is cut in two, and the white laborers must be arranged upon the side of their own exploiters and by persistent propaganda and police force. So, like, they're giving the white people the power. Yeah. Labor can gain in the South no class consciousness. Strikes cannot be effective because the white strikers can be threatened by people of color scab. And they forced them to do that, everybody. They forced them to do that. The strikers of color can be clapped in jail. The result of the disenfranchisement of black people on the political life of the South has been pitiful. Southerners argue that if black people was disenfranchised, normal political life would be possible for the South. They did not realize that a living working class can never lose its political power, and that all they did in 1876 was to transfer the political power from the hands of labor to the hands of capital, where it has been concentrated ever since. Moreover, after the transfer of the forms of Republican government became a continuing farce, as Chamberlain said. If Kid Bing's still here, nice to see you. Every present citizens of South Carolina knows that those who are truthful and frank will confess that the ballot debauched in 1876 remains debauched. The violence taught them remains now, if not in the same, in other forms. The defiance of law learned then in what it was called a good cause survives in the horrid orgies of degradation and of lynching. There can be no doubt that the revolution of 1876 established fraud and oligarchy in the South, and the remains of that regime are still with us. Local governments in the South to this day is handicapped and frustrated by caste and by the use of the color line to divine the electorate and dominate dominate black people. As late as 1931, the Atlanta Constitution said of the Georgian legislature, never in its history has Georgia been inflicted with so incompetent of legislators as the one just adjourned. George W. Cable said in 1885. The vote, after all, was a secondary point, and the robbery and bribery on one side and the whipping and killing on the other, were but huge accidents of the situation. The two main questions were really these. On the freeman's side, how to establish Republican state government under the same recognition of his rights that the rest of the Christendom accorded him. And on the former master's side, how to get back to the old semblance of Republican state government, and allowing the freeman was a de facto a voter, still to maintain a purely arbitrary superiority of all whites over all black people, and a purely arbitrary equality of all black people among themselves as an alien, menial, and dangerous class. Exceptionally here and there, someone in the master caste did throw off the old and accept the new ideas, and if he would allow it, was instantly claimed as a leader by the newly liberated thousands around him. But just as promptly, the old master race branded him also an alien reprobate, and in 99 cases out of 100, if he had not already done so, he soon began to confirm by this action the brand of his cheek. Is it cheeks? Yeah, cheek. The paradox of this whole muddle is that what the South started to do in 1876 was never accomplished and never will be. Black people cannot be disenfranchised. He votes in every public policy, and the only result of disenfranchisement is to bind the white South hand and foot and deliver it to its own worst self. Stevens and Sumner stand internally vindicated, particularly as has the South suffered spiritually by the efforts to use propaganda and enforce belief. This always results in a deliberate lying. Not that all white Southerners deliberately lied about black people, but to an astonishing degree, the honest South allows none lies to stand uncontradicted. The wide distortion of facts which become prevalent in the white South during and after Reconstruction as a measure of self-defense has never been wholly crushed since. For years, Southerners denied that there was any fraud and cheating in elections. Henry Grady stood in Boston and told New England that black people was as free to vote in the South as the white laborers was in the North. Booker T. Washington repeatedly testified as to the goodwill and essential honesty of purpose of Southerners, and put the whole burden of responsibility for advance upon black people himself. Quote, "The Southern white man is the black person best friend." Oh, I guess he had that wrong. Screaming all the Southerner papers, even today. And this in the face of the open record of 5,000 lynchings, jails burstings with black prisoners incarcerated on trivial and trumped up charges, and cash sharing from every train and streetcar. This whole phantasmagoria has been built on the most measurable of human function. That is, that in addition to the manifest differences between men, there is a deep, awful, and ineradicable. I'm going to look up this word. I'm going to try and pronounce it because that's my things. I have to try to pronounce things. Oh my gosh. Come on. Okay. Here we go. We're going to look it up. Hey, Colleen, if you're still here. Looking up a word, everybody. R-A-D-I-C. It's taking me forever to write it, I know. Come on.
Ineradicable.
Ineradicable. Something that is impossible to root out, destroy, or completely remove. Ineradicable. Cleft, which condemns most men to internal degradation. It is a cheap inheritance of the world's infancy, unworthy of grown folk. My rise does not involve your fall. No superior has interest in inferiority. Humanity is one of its vast variety, is its glory, and note its condemnation. If all men make the best of themselves, if all men have the chance to meet and know each other, the result is love born of knowledge and not of hate based on ignorance. The result of this upon the higher life in the South was extraordinary. Fundamentalism rules in religion because men hesitate openly to reason about the golden rule. Literature, art, and music are curiously dominated by black people, and the only literature the South has had for years is based largely upon black people. Southern music is black music, yet black people themselves are seldom recognized as interpreters of art, and white artists must work under severe social limitations, and at second hand, they thus lack necessary serenity, sincerity, depth, and frankness. Democracy in the South and in the United States is hampered by the Southern attitude. The Southerner, by winning the victory which the 14th Amendment tried to deny, uses the black population as a basis of his political representation and allows few black people to vote, so that the white Southerner marches to the polls with many times as much voting power in the hands as the voter in the North. The South does and must vote for reaction. There can be, therefore, neither in the South nor in the nation a successful third-party movement. This was proven in the case of Theodore Roosevelt and La Follette. A solid block of reaction in the South can always be depended upon to unite with Northern conservatism to elect a president. One can only say to all this that whatever the South gained through its victory in the Revolution in 1876 has been paid for at the price which literally staggers humanity. Imperialism and exploitation of people of color labor throughout the world thrive upon the approval of the United States, and the United States gives that approval because of the South. World War waits on the support imperial aggressions, and international jealousy. This was too great a price to pay for anything which the South gained. The chief obstacle of this rich realm of the United States, endowed with every natural resource and with the abilities of 100 different peoples, the chief and only obstacle to the coming of the kingdom of economic equality, which is the only logic end of the work, is the determination of the white world to keep the black world poor and themselves rich. A clear vision of the world without inordinate individual wealth, of capital without profit, and of income based on work alone, is the path out, not only for America, but for all men. Across this path stands the South, with flaming swords. Of course, it would be humanly impossible for any such regime to be completely successful anywhere without protest and reaction from within. Alms givings to black people in the South has always been almost universal. Even petty pilfering has been winked at. Beyond this, and of far greater social significance, have been the personal friendships between black people and whites, with aid and advice. Even a great pensionary, I think that's pensionary. Let me make sure. I'm gonna try and say it, see what happens. Pensionary. Nope.
Pictionary is a drawing.
I didn't say Pictionary, I said pensionary.
Teams guess words from sketches.
P-E-C. There it is. Please say I said it right.
Pecuniary.
Oh, pecuniarity. Oh, let me say it again.
Pecuniary.
Pecuniarity. I can't say it. Pecuniary is a formal adjective that refers to or consists of money and spiritual cost. Large-hearted Southern white men and women have in unnumbered cases, quietly and without advertisement, done enormous work to make life bearable and success possible for thousands of black people. Most of the benevolence of this sort, however, has been of a personal and individual matter. In only a minority of cases have such Southern white people been willing to stand on principle and demand for all black people's rights as men and treatment according to desert. I don't know why it says according to desert. When in some cases such opinion and clearly advocacy has been made and has consequently invoked the usual social punishment, it is singular and almost peculiar to the South how seldom Southern whites have had the courage to stand up and suffer for righteousness' sakes against the mass terror of public opinion. In the South, the iconolists and martyrs, not only on the black question, but on other moral matters, have been conspicuously absent, and where they have arisen, they have soon either subsided into silence or retreated to the more tolerant atmosphere of the North, leaving the South all the poorer and all the more easily hammered into conformity with the mob. If white and black in the South were free and intelligent, there would be friendship and some intermarriage, and there ought to be, but none would marry where he did not wish to, and there could be no greater intermingling in the future than in the shameful past, unless this union of races proved successful and attractive. The Revolution of 1876 was, in fine, a victory for which the South has every right to hang its head. After enslaving black people for 2.5 centuries, it turned on this emancipation to beaten man to trade in slaves, and to kill the defenseless, to break the spirit of the black man and humiliate him into hopelessness, to establish a new dictatorship of property in the South through the color line. It was the triumph of men who, in their efforts to replace equality with caste and to build inordinate wealth on the foundations of abject poverty, having succeeded in killing democracy, art, and religion. And yet, despite this, despite the long step backward towards slavery, the black folk have been pushed. They have made withdraw and brave withal and brave and fine fight, a fight against ridicule and monstrous caricatures, against every refinement of cruelty and gross insults, against starvation, disease, and murder, and every form. Hold on a second. I don't think there's not of you. Thank you. It has left in their soul its scars, its deep scars. But all is said through it all was gone a thread of brave and splendid friendship from those few and rare men and women of white skins, North and South, who have dared to know and help the love of black folk, and help and love black folk. The unending tragedy of Reconstruction is the utter inability of the American mind to grasp its real significance, its national and worldwide implications. It was vain for Sumner and Stevens to hammer in the ears of the people that this problem involved the very foundation of American democracy, both political and economic. We were still too blind and infatuated to conceive of the emancipation of the laboring classes in half the nation as a revolution comparable to the upheavals in France in the past and in Russia, Spain, India, and China. Today, we are worried when the beginnings of this experiment cost $18 millions of dollars, and quite aghast when the debts of $225 million has involved, including waste and theft. We apparently expected that this social upheaval was going to be accomplished with peace, honesty, and efficiency, and that the planters were going quietly to surrender the right to live on the labor of black folk. After 250 years of habitual exploitation, and it seems to America a proof of inherent race inferiority, that 4 million slaves did not completely emancipate themselves in 80 years, in the midst of the 9 million bitter enemies and indifferent public opinions of the whole nation. The reconstruction of the South, of the Southern states, from slavery to free labor, and from aristocracy to industrial democracy, had been conceived as a major national program of America, whose accomplishment at any price was well worth the effort. We should be living today in a different world. The attempts on black men, American citizens, was in a certain sense all a failure, but a splendid failure. It did not fail where it was expected to fail. It was, oh my gosh, Athenasas contra Modinium. Ooh. It's going to be a long thing. Hold on a second. I'm going to write it down. Hold on a second. Athanas. Oh, hold on a second. No! Stop! No, stop! Hold on, I'm trying to... Where am I at? ANSIUS. Go away, fly. There it is. It's against the world. I can't say this word. Athenas contra modium. A famous Latin phrase meaning against the world, described in the 14th century church. Okay. With back to the wall, outnumbered 10-1, with all the wealth of and all the opportunity and all the world against him, and only in his hands and heart the consciousness of a great and just cause, fighting the battle of all the oppressed and despised humanity of very race and color against the masked hireling of religion, science, education, laws, and brute force. Right here it says, for he has a pall of wretched men, Pall. Such a few men can claim, deep down below the prison yard, naked for greater shame. He lies with fetters on each foot, wrapped in the sheet of flames. Oscar Wilde. That's the end of that chapter. Oh my gosh. Next chapter. The propaganda of history. Okay. Propaganda of history. So we're going to go into this a little bit. 15 minutes before we go. Maybe. Hold on a second. Let me look ahead. 783. Oh my gosh, what is this? Okay. I'm gonna look at something here. So they brought the caste system. The South was the one that, okay. So they fortified slavery and the caste system and everything so far. And it's gone to show that the system in the world is against black people, which is the truth. So let me get past all this stuff real quick. See where we go. The propaganda of history. How the facts of American history have, in the last half century, been falsified because the nation was ashamed. The South was ashamed because it fought to perpetuate human slavery. The North was ashamed because it had called in the black man to save the Union, abolish slavery, and establish democracy. What are American children taught today about Reconstruction? Helen and Broadman has made a study of the current textbooks and notes of these three dominant theses. Quote 1, all black people were ignorant. We are all ignorant in businesses. Okay, wait. And it just says a whole bunch of people. I think this is just what they're saying. Although black people were not free, they were also ignorant and unfit to govern themselves. That's someone else says. Black people got control of these states. They had been slaves all their lives and were so ignorant that they did not even know the letter of the alphabet, and yet they now sat in the state legislature and made laws. Ew. These are all racist people. In the South, black people who had so suddenly gained their freedom did not know what to do with it. Okay, another one. The legislator, black people were so ignorant that they could only watch their white leaders, carpetbaggers, and vote A or no, as they were told. Oh my gosh. Some legislators were made up of a few dishonest white men and several black people, many too ignorant to know anything about lawmaking. Jesus Christ. Number 2, all black people are lazy, dishonest, and extravagant. All right, here's what they said. Oh my God. Why you make me do this, Du Bois? Why you make me do this? These men knew not only nothing about the government, but also cared for nothing except what they could gain for themselves. Jesus. Legislators were often at the mercy of black people, childishly ignorant, who sold their votes openly and whose loyalty was gained by allowing them to eat, drink, and clothe themselves at the state's expense. Jesus Christ. Some black people spent their money foolishly and were worse off than they had been before. Jesus Christ. This assistance led many free men to believe that they need no longer work. They also ignorantly believe that the land of their former masters were to be turned over by Congress to them, and that every black person was to have, as his allotment, 40 acres and a mule. Thinkers that slavery meant toil, and that the freemen meant only idleness, and slaves, after he was set free, was disposed to try out his freedom, but refused to work. That's not true. They began to wander about stealing and plundering. In 1 week, in Georgetown, 150 black people were arrested for thieving. Number 3, black people were responsible for bad government during Reconstruction. Quote, these are all quotes, everybody. Foolish laws were passed by black lawmakers, and public money was wasted terribly, and thousands of dollars were stolen straight. Self-respecting Southerners chafed under the horrible regime, Jesus Christ, in the exhausted states already ample, punished by dislocation of war and rule of black people and his unscrupulous carpetbaggers and scallywags patrons, was an orgy of extravagance, fraud, and disgusting incompetency. These are assholes. The picture of Reconstruction, which the average pupil in these 16 states received a limited to the South. The South found it necessary to pass black codes for the control of and the swiftness, and the shiftness, and sometimes vicious freemen. The Freeman Bureau caused black people to look to the North rather than the South to support and by giving them a false sense of equality, but did more harm than good. With the scallywags and the ignorant of the non-property holding black people under the leadership of the carpetbaggers, engaged in a wild orgy in spending of the legislators. The humiliation and distress of the Southern whites was in part relieved by the Triple K, a secret organization which frightened the superstitious black people. Jesus Christ. What a bunch of dicks. Okay, let me see if there's anything else, because I wanted to finish that part up. All right, we're going to stop right here. It's a good spot to start. It's a new paragraph. We got to see what they had. That's the propaganda. So we're going to talk about the propaganda. And it's going to be the propaganda, what is it called, first of all? Propaganda of history. So basically, we're going to go over the history of what history tells us about black people in the United States. So that's going to be fun. Get more shit. Hello. What would you like to say?
What page were we on?
784 is where we're stopping.
784. All right. And so I was listening, and like, no one's really in here, but just for everyone, like Lynn knows this, but the South still has so much slavery because most of the South is prison towns in the South.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and now we're going to learn about the history and what kind of propaganda they gave about the black people and shit. That was a hard little things to read what they were saying about black people and stuff like that. And like what really pisses me off is that they're the ones that underdeveloped them in the first place. So they have the responsibility to get them up to par and up to thing that they detrimentally took from them. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, why are they ignorant? Because you made them that way. You purposely made them unintelligent. You purposely stole from their communities that they were already learning and getting formal education through their whatever they are, their communities, their tribes, whatever, that you stole from. And then you got here and you placed them all against other people that were from different places, so they couldn't communicate and they had no ties to the land and no education. You were just told to pick this stuff. Well, of course, you fuckers. Duh. Like, you did it. It's your conditions to fix, you know?
Yeah, but yet black people are so resilient that they still created a culture, and they brought like a little piece of music from here and a little piece of music from there, and then they combined them to make new music, and secretly would sneak seeds in their hair so that they could grow things like okra and stuff like that. So they made their own, against what we tried to do as white people.
Yeah. Well, if you have no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and close it out. So, and we'll start the propaganda thing tomorrow.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, everybody, have a good night. Well, the three people